Hey everybody, welcome to the ATDev Podcast. I'm so happy to be joined today by Dr. Robert Kilpatrick, a longtime friend and supporter of ATDevs. Hi Robert, how are you?
Hi, Owen. I'm fine, and I'm so delighted to be with you today.
Thank you. We're happy to have you, and I think our listeners are in for a real treat. It would be great if you could give some background on yourself and how we were connected.
Sure. We originally met through Berkeley Skydeck, which is the leading kind of academic accelerator and incubator in the United States for high tech companies. And so you came, were part of that cohort, and I was running a master class in pitching biotech ideas to investors. And that's when we met. And I was just immediately taken with not only the story that you were telling, but also the way you told it and the fact that the products that you were developing are so closely related to the reality that you experience in the world. So I was a fan from the moment I met you.
You're too kind, but we were very happy. And so, could you talk a little bit about your academic background and your how did you get into the positions that you're into today?
That's a good question. I've thought about that. I was raised in the country and in Northern California, very close to nature. And so from a very early age, I was very interested in everything to do with nature and life and living systems. And so I went to Berkeley and studied biology and the life sciences in order to prepare to go to medical school. But I was always very interested in almost everything. So history and politics and society and philosophy. And I also had a strong grounding in the church. So I was interested in moral philosophy. So an opportunity arose for me to go for a year to University of Cambridge in England, and I did a master's degree in the history of medicine. And they offered me a chance to do a PhD and then a research fellowship. So I abandoned my plans to become a medical doctor and instead became a doctor of philosophy. And I taught a course to undergraduates about paradigm shifts, new ways of thinking, and how that happens, and how you go from one way of thinking to another way of thinking. Really looking at entrepreneurship and innovation in the past. And then from there, I came back and started a company called Technology Vision Group and was asked by newly elected Vice President Al Gore to find a way to get American and European biotech companies to communicate. And working with others, we started a conference called Biopartnering Europe that over 20 years had clients in 30 countries, and we were on the ground in all major regions of the world. And after that, I decided to take some time out, got involved with Berkeley Skydeck, had a year in Oxford to write a book on the future of human care. And then I came across you and your team, and then you asked me to be on this call. So that's a potted history of my journey so far.
That's fascinating, and I really love your journey about how you've taken such a interdisciplinary approach to really what is the human experience. I think that's something that is really underemphasized in a lot of the programs at universities, and really how important it is to have an interdisciplinary study about, for example, the history of science and why, for example, mechanical engineering is where it's at today, and all of the things that led to the things that we take for granted.
I'd even written down as a note before we spoke, emphasize experience of healthcare or caring for health. And what I realized way back when, many years ago, when I first went to Cambridge, was that when you think about health and healthcare and wellness and well-being, you're really talking about a whole human being. So human beings are affected by their housing, by their food, by how they live, where they live, war-torn Syria or Ukraine versus Beverly Hills or a quiet suburb in the United States.
Right.
So I realize that when you think about health, and you have to think about people, there's no other way around it. We are not just cells, we are not just microbes, we are not just atoms or genes, we are whole human beings. And therefore, it's vital to approach health and healthcare from an interdisciplinary perspective because all of us are affected by history, by politics, by ethics, by economics. If you don't have money to afford to live in a reasonably healthy way, you're not going to fulfill your potential. So I
Right?
think focusing on people, the reality of people in their lives, and adopting an interdisciplinary approach, as you so wisely pointed out, is probably where the arc of all my work has happened.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I completely agree. I think a lot of healthcare is so segmented, and being able to view patients as people, taking a holistic approach, is really something that is needed and needs to be taught more. I'm curious, you have such a diverse background of entrepreneurship and academia. How has your life trajectory been shaped by the interplay of those two things? And how have you taken those lessons from academia and applied them to entrepreneurship?
That's a good question, Owen. I think at the root of the question is the reality that different people's brains, I think, are wired differently. So in my case, I have always had a kind of holistic view of the world. So a practical example of this is if I see a face, whether it's in the real world or it's, in a photograph, I never forget it. And I never forget experiences. I can meet someone and then 50 years later, I can see them again and I remember them. However, I have a hard time memorizing the exact lyrics of songs or poetry or chemical formula like the Krebs cycle. Because my brain seems to be wired in a holistic way, and I seem to automatically, without even consciously setting the trigger for this, I automatically see everything holistically. And so an interdisciplinary approach is natural for me because I can't think of any other way of doing it. And one of the reasons why after Berkeley I went to Cambridge was I wanted to be in the Department of History and Philosophy of Science. There you have it. History and philosophy of science. It's
Yeah,
very rare for scientists to study history and philosophy, and it's very rare for historians and philosophers to study science. So I was in an interdisciplinary department, and that suited how my brain actually works. And that's why I often encourage young people when I work with them and teach them and say, don't be so hard on yourself if something isn't working for you. That may just be the way you're wired. And it doesn't matter how hard you struggle, you may never be able to master that thing. But if you understand how your brain works and what your proclivities are, you might identify things you're extremely good at. That was certainly true of me. So to go back to your question, it is absolutely natural for me that I studied really innovation and entrepreneurship in the in previous centuries in my courses in history of medicine. And so therefore, when I was in Cambridge and then Apple Computer and Genentech and all these amazing tech companies started being created in Silicon Valley, where I'm from, yet I was over in the UK, I thought, okay, I don't want to just study these types of companies 200 years ago. I want to study them now. So that kind of led me into this Skydeck because I had gone to Berkeley. The creator of it, Rich Lyons, who is now the chancellor of UC Berkeley, having previously been the dean of Haas Berkeley Business School, he and I were in the same fraternity at Berkeley. So he's a little younger than I am, but we knew each other. So he encouraged me to get involved with Skydeck. And I've never been happier because when I met you, I thought, here's a modern version of the pioneers that I was teaching about but 100 or 200 or 300 years ago.
Wow, that's so interesting. I love what you're saying. I think my brain is probably wired similarly. I
Mm-hmm.
really like taking that approach of thinking holistically. I think one of my favorite authors was James Burke and his television show The Day the Universe Changed,
Yep.
which is a lot about the history of science and how one invention, often by mistake, leads into the discovery of another invention. And I think that's so important for people that are in science to really understand how their work fits into a larger picture because while you need to take such a really focused view of something when you're doing your PhD or even in entrepreneurship, you are part of an ecosystem that has a much larger influence and impact, and your work has crossover into other people's work, and it may turn into something that you never even imagined.
That's such a good observation because James Burke also had a television series called Connections, and in
Yes.
which he showed how so many different kind of innovations and discoveries and ways that scientists or natural philosophers in the old days how they interacted. There were all these connections that you could even draw on a whiteboard if you wanted to, or nowadays probably on a computer screen. But this plays into what you just said a minute ago, because I find when I do these master classes at Berkeley Skydeck, one of the greatest challenges that the founders confront, and you are not guilty of this, I have to say, but most of them are, although guilty is not the right word, but prone to, let's put it that way, was this
Yes.
tendency that whatever they've invented or whatever they've discovered is so exciting for them that they automatically assume that everybody else will also be excited. And so I jokingly say, if you want an audience that will agree 100% with what you say, you should give your pitch in front of the mirror in the bathroom in the morning. Your audience will love everything you have to say. If you want to convince other people about the need that you believe exists for whatever it is you're proposing to do, you have to be able to make connections. You have to connect to them and to stand in their shoes. And so, in that way, I say to them, look, you don't really matter in this. In the same way, if you're a fly fisherman, you don't really matter. What matters is what the fish wants in that moment, what the fish
Right.
thinks when it sees your fly. And if you don't catch a fish, you can't blame the fish. And I say to the founders, this is trial and error. You have to try, you have to experience lack of success. You will learn from that. But at all times, connect with the people you're talking to. And I think that's apart from the human experience of innovation and entrepreneurship. I think connections at every level are absolutely vital to success. And you showed from the very beginning, when I first saw your slide deck and all of that, that you understood that. And in that way, I didn't feel I had a lot to teach you, although your peers had a lot to learn.
I feel like I've learned a lot from you, and even this conversation, I think I'm continuing to learn from you.
Thank you, and vice versa.
So, you are also a prolific author and have thought a lot about care as a human, and I believe we're working on a book, The Future of Human Care.
Hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about what some of the themes that you're exploring are?
Sure. I think every day somewhere we hear the word healthcare. Oh, healthcare is failing. Healthcare is too expensive. Healthcare, blah, blah, blah. The reality is that when people talk about healthcare, as Michael Moore has pointed out in his movie Sicko, we're not talking about healthcare, we're talking about sick care.
Mm.
And so healthcare systems, regardless of what they are, and we don't need to name names, but we know who they are. They're hospitals, they're doctors' offices, they're medical clinics, and the healthcare providers are trained very well trained, in fact, to diagnose, to treat disease, to manage disease. They are not trained to help you care for your health. And so I like to separate the word care from the word health. When I write healthcare, I write health space care. So
Mm,
the book I'm writing, The Future of Human Care, it really poses a question in the first paragraph, which is, regardless of race, color, creed, national origin, age, all of this stuff, all of these ways that we choose to divide human beings into groups, sometimes belonging to many groups simultaneously.
yep.
But if we think about my question is, what is it on the one hand that all human beings need to live? What do they need in terms of care? So clean air, clean water, shelter. So the first chapter in the book is called An N of 8 billion. So it looks at what every human being on the planet needs at a fairly basic level to be able to at least live, get an education, have work of some kind. Absence of war is important. Peace is important. All of these things, if you were raised in war-torn Syria or Gaza or Ukraine right now, it'd be almost impossible to do the things that we take for granted
Right.
here where we live. And then the final chapter is an N of 1. Often I work with Camp Hill Communities, California, which is a residential community of able bodied people living together in community with physical and mentally disabled folks with
Oh,
what is referred
interesting.
to as special needs. CampHillCalifornia.org. I've worked with them for a number of years, particularly in the gardens. And what I learned from Camp Hill was that, in fact, every human being has special needs. Think about this for a second, Owen. Even identical twins do not have the same fingerprint.
Ah,
So,
interesting.
so every human being in the world, on the one hand, has a whole set of things that we need to care about if they're going to live at any reasonable level. And at the same time, no human beings have exactly the same need. So we're all the same, and yet none of us are the same. So the book is that
Right.
story about how to care for human beings who have a lot in common and nothing in common. And what would healthcare systems look like that were actually human centric rather than money centric?
I think that is the question that I think many people are grappling with right now. Even ATDev, we fit into this larger picture of the healthcare system, but the goal is really to provide the most patient centric care possible. That's fascinating. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome. I want to say one final thing about that, which is that most of the time, most people are actually not patients. So that's the thing. You can be a member of a healthcare organization of some kind, and you can have your annual checkups and all the colon cancer tests and various things. But the question is, what does your healthcare system do to help you to stay healthy, to build your wellness, to have well being? And I think it's a very rare healthcare system that is able to operate in that space. And I do think that's the $1 trillion opportunity, which is that people are going to figure out how to use AI and the internet and all sorts of things to help people build communities, perhaps getting an AI driven avatar that is specific for you, that speaks your language or your dialect and can answer questions and help you stay on course, motivate you, incentivize you. And I'm working with a startup company. I can't mention the name yet, but I'm working with a startup company. It's not a startup. It's been around for 5 years. A lot of money went into it, and now we're going to take it up to a global scale, seeking to address that very question, which is, think of that N of 1, that final chapter. So, what kind of a service could we provide every human being on the planet that would help them to improve their health journey?
That's fascinating, and I think a very important problem to be solving. I think a lot of it is also wellness and prevention too. I think that certainly in the US, there's not enough focus on prevention, which I think could reduce a lot of the unideal outcomes of surgery or what have you.
That's a good point. And for 3 years, until fairly recently, I worked with Professor Leroy Hood, who's one of the original members of the group that devised the Human Genome Project. And he's been a great believer for maybe 20 years in something he calls P4 medicine. So prediction, prevention, personalization, and participation. He's created a startup company, a not for profit called Phenome Health. Phenome being the dynamic interaction between the genes, the environment, and a person's behavior. And he's also the chief innovation officer at the Buck Institute for Research on Aging in Novato and Marin County. So I worked with Lee for 3 years, and I learned a lot about what people call precision health, pursuing health goals precisely. And prediction and prevention are part of that. And now with Scientific American, we've created a global project called the Precision Health Revolution, and it has two pieces to it. One is Precision Health Collaborative, where we're going to bring together thought leaders, decision makers, and funders to work together to advance all of this. And our first project is on precision health in cancer, particularly with AI applications. And then the second part of the Precision Health Revolution is the ecosystem project. So we're looking at all the regions in the world where precision, prevention, other things are being advanced and not just R&D, but deployed in the real world with real people. So certain regions such as Finland, United Arab Emirates, Dubai, Singapore, Korea, UK are at the cutting edge of this, and we're working with leaders in these different regions to understand how they're doing it.
That's so exciting. And I have a lot of hope for the future in terms of healthcare and how these technological advancements are going to be able to improve lives, really. And I am really excited and honored to be in connection and conversation with you and all of the amazing things you're doing. So thank you again for your time today, Robert. And I really encourage our listeners to look at your past work and your books and learn more about the things that you're interested in because I think people could learn a lot from you.
Thank you for that. I learn a lot from you even in this call. If people want to find me on LinkedIn, it's Robert Lee Kilpatrick. You can find me there and message me, and I have a lot of things I write on that. And also, I want to learn about the latest advances with your company. Either drop me a line and or I'll have a look at your website later today, okay?
Great. Thank you, Robert. And thank you to all our listeners. Stay tuned to the next one.
Thank you, Owen. Bye.